Hello everybody, and welcome to the February edition of the Farmers Supply Association Agriculture Report. I'm Randy Klepechka, agronomist with Farmers Supply Association. Well, it's February, so that means next month is planting season. Hopefully we can get started planting some stuff next month. You know, we generally like to see some corn and rice planted in March. We hadn't got a lot of early planting done the last couple of years, but that means we're due for a better planting season. So hopefully, you know, when we talk to you next month, that'll be the month that planting season is going to start. So, you know, we're getting close to that field work time. Of course, it's awful wet right now, but that can change pretty quickly. Regardless of how wet it is right now, there are a couple of field items that are going to need to be taken care of this month. Number one, wheat fertilization for those that have wheat. Number two, and for a whole lot of people, will be burn down herbicide applications. So those are the two things I want to talk about this month and get into a little more detail on. First, wheat fertilization. Of course, we're talking about three elements there: nitrogen, sulfur, and sometimes maybe some phosphorus may be needed in this first application. So I want to talk about those three different elements, some issues with timing and sources of fertilizer and things like that. First, again, nitrogen. As far as timing, again, we're right at that time for that first application. Now, a lot of it depends on how well your wheat has developed when you got it planted. You know, for early wheat that's tillered well, then you've got some time to play with. You know, you can go mid-February, maybe even closer to late February if the timing just doesn't work out and you don't get it done that quick. If you happen to have some wheat, and I don't think there's much of that this year, that got planted late, and you happen to have a cold winter, which we really haven't had this year, and the wheat hasn't tillered, hasn't developed well, then you need to get some fertilizer out there generally in early February. So generally we're not there, so I'm thinking, you know, probably about mid-February ought to be pretty good timing for that first nitrogen application. We do like to see split applications pretty much everywhere. That first application, again in February. The second one, you know, we're talking about before that internode starts moving, before that reproductive period starts. So generally probably talking about, you know, somewhere around the 10th of March. I've seen that joint start moving in late February. I've seen it more like the middle of March before it starts moving. So, you know, roughly around the 10th of March, be watching for that internode to move. And by the time that internode starts moving, you need to have that rest of that fertilizer out there. As far as rates, I think in most cases, about 120 units of nitrogen is going to be sufficient. Now, if you happen to have some ground that's poor, bad stands and things like that, you probably don't need to go that much. You know, maybe 90 units in a case like that. But, you know, roughly 120 units. Sometimes you may know that your wheat responds to more than that. So, but, you know, roughly I think a good average figure would be 120 units total. That first split, again, you know, now probably a half or a little more than half in that first application, then a little less than half up to around half in that second application, just getting that total up around 120 units. You know, I get some questions about agrotane with wheat, and it's not as clear-cut of a thing as it is, you know, with our nitrogen for rice and corn. We know we need agrotane pretty much every case there. And with wheat, you know, it depends on how cold it is, how wet it is. Really, the warmer it is and the wetter it is, the better chance you have of getting a response from agrotane. It's not going to be the kind of response you get with rice or corn in the hot season, but you can get enough response to pay for it and make a little profit off of it if it's, you know, wetter and colder than usual. So keep that in mind with our nitrogen. Is, you know, just how wet is it, how warm is it, and you may want to go ahead and pull the trigger on that agrotane. Sulfur is mostly needed on those sandier soils. Of course, that's where our wheat is grown for the most part. We do have some, you know, rice occasionally, you know, wheat behind rice and on some heavier ground, but most of our wheat is planted on that sandier ground. So I definitely want to see some sulfur out there. As far as timing, again, the recommendation has always been to put your sulfur with that first spring nitrogen application. But on some of this sandier soil, I like to see it split into both applications. You know, I see responses from sulfur, you know, pretty good on that first application. And sometimes if it's really put out early, if it's really wet, you need a second application as well. So I just like to go ahead and split it, you know. Generally 50 to 75 pounds of ammonium sulfate with both applications are to cover you pretty well. So that's kind of like what I like to see on sulfur. Phosphorus, not as, generally most people are going to put their phosphorus out pre-plant. So if you did that, the appropriate rate pre-plant, you probably don't need any. But if you're seeing some reddening, purpling, kind of typical of phosphorus deficiency, or if your soil test called for phosphorus on wheat and you did not get it out in the back in the fall, then you need to go ahead and try to get some of that out right now with that first nitrogen application. Of course, DAP is a source of 1846O, so that's a good source for that. You want to get about 40 to 46 units out there, so that would be a perfect, case right there. And sometimes, especially if you put some pre-plants, you may just want to put 50 pounds of DAP. That'll get you 923O. So just depending on what you've done in the past, if you're seeing deficiency and things like that. Next, let's move to burn down herbicide applications. Two situations really that we deal with burn downs. One is the situation where you're going to use tillage anyway, but it's starting to get grown up, you're starting to get in those unmanageable situations, maybe with some of these winter weeds starting to get a little bit taller and bigger and things like that. You just want to manage it, because if you let those things keep growing, then a lot of times the ground won't dry out and you'll never get out there in a timely manner to get tillage done. So in those situations, again, where you got some stuff showing up, but you're going to till anyway, I think you still want to go ahead and do something to try to keep that beat back so the ground doesn't stay wet and it'll dry out timely for you. In a lot of cases like that, you may just want to put a big shot of Roundup, maybe 40 ounces of Roundup out there, and just kind of keep it beat back. You don't have to keep it perfectly clean, just kind of keep things beat back where ground will dry out in a more timely manner and things like that. So that's one situation. The other situation, where you're planning on either stale seed bedding, meaning you've got the ground worked up and it's ready to plant, but you just want to keep it clean. The other situation is where it's no-till. You didn't do anything. The ground, you harvested smooth last year and really don't have to do anything, and you just want to go ahead and plant right into that. I think in either one of those situations, we need to keep it clean. We're not going to till it, so we need to be keeping it pretty much perfectly clean in these situations. So we want to put out that burn down application, and we typically want to put a residual in there, something like a Valor with that, so we can go ahead and keep these fields clean, so we don't have weeds emerging and things like that. So something like maybe a Roundup plus, there's several options of good tank mixes that help enhance activity on broadleaf weeds and other weeds. So something like a Roundup plus a 2,4-D, Roundup plus First Shot, Roundup plus Sharpen. All of those are really good tank mixes. And depends on what your weed situation is. Some of these are stronger on other weeds, on some weeds than others. So you can look in the MP44 at that ratings chart and see what might be the best tank mix additive for you, whether it be 2,4-D, First Shot, or Sharpen or something else. So keep that in mind. And then, of course, add the Valor or something like that to it to keep your residual activity and keep things from coming up. Remember, with Valor, there is a 30-day plant back to rice and corn, so some people forget that you can, as long as it's going to be at least 30 days before you're going to plant your rice, you can still go ahead and put that Valor in there with it and try to keep things clean. So again, these are the situations where you're trying to stale seed bed or no-till. Some other options out there include, of course, Gramoxone can be a good burn down activity as well. I really like it. Later on, when our pigweeds start coming up, of course, it's one of the better pigweed materials out there for burn down. So I like to kind of save that Gramoxone and use that in those later situations when you have pigweeds out there. But there's certainly other places you can use Gramoxone as well. It's a good burn down activity. Always remember, in most situations, you want to add one of those PS2 herbicides to it, which would be like if you're growing cotton, which we don't have hardly any around here, but you can use a Diuron with the Gramoxone. If you're growing soybeans, you can put a little metribuzin in with your Gramoxone. If you're planting corn or grain sorghum, you could put some atrazine in with your Gramoxone, and that just enhances that Gramoxone activity, helps it get it into the plant. I hear people all the time saying, well, my Gramoxone, it just gives you a quick burn and then it grows out of it. But if you'll put that PS2 inhibitor and just takes a few ounces of it in there with your Gramoxone, it'll help it get it into the plant and you'll get significantly better activity. I think it makes it a whole new herbicide, in my opinion, to put that in there with it. So those are possibilities as well. Ryegrass is a little different situation. Clethodim or generic Select, are some of your better options right here. Remember that as one of your best choices for ryegrass. Also, clethodim is generally good only on the smaller ryegrass. Once you get some bigger ryegrass, it's not as effective, so maybe something like a gramoxone plus the PS2 inhibitor for the ryegrass situation as well. So a couple options right there for ryegrass, which just seems to get worse every year. Remember our plant backs when adding especially these tank mixes like the 2,4-D to the Roundup, to keep that in mind that there is plant backs on some of our crops behind that, so keep that in mind when you do those tank mixes. And also keep in mind temperatures. When we do these burn downs, we like to see that temperature, preferably highs at least in the 50s and lows above freezing for these burn downs to be effective. And I've seen them effective at lower temperatures, but they're usually very, very slow. So I really prefer that you wait and get those warmer temperatures and get some quicker activity with them. So again, that's wheat fertilization and burn down for the month of February, and hopefully we'll be back in March talking about some planting. This has been Randy Kopechka with the February edition of the Farmer Supply Association Agriculture Report.